I've been talking about this with quite a few people lately because it's a similar, similar thread to some of the conversations. Learn when to fire yourself.
Hmm.
It would be the advice I would give you. And you're not going to be able to fire yourself for a while when you're a solopreneur and you're just starting and maybe you have one or two employees, right? But you are going to have to figure out along the path when it's time to let go of certain things. And you should look at it as like, I'm firing myself from being the director of marketing. I'm the CEO. I can't be responsible for putting out all of the tweets and running the paid search program and all these kinds of things that might come up. And
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Matt Ranta, and Matt graduated from college with a art major, and then afterwards did a couple odd jobs, and then started at a store as a first or as a customer service before moving into sales. And then that business started to build a website, go into e-commerce, and had an interest in that, and helped to build that out along with the databases, and then or along the way reached a bit of a breaking point and got worn out, and so had another or lined up another job, and then before leaving asked the company about a position closer to home and got a new position afterwards. Managed and grew the e-commerce side of the business for a while and became the head of marketing. 2011 wanted a new challenge, so moved to Denver and started helping others with different businesses, and then moved into the mobile and art tech business, and founded his own consultancy in 2021, and that's been I think got acquired, so now he has a partner and been doing that with them as well. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Matt.
yeah, thanks, Devin. I appreciate it. Great opportunity and looking forward to conversation.
Absolutely. So I just gave a 30-second version to a much longer journey. So why don't we rewind and unpack that a bit? So if we'd kind of go back to, you're coming out or going into college and getting the art major and figuring out what you're going to do, maybe tell us how your journey got started there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll rewind all the way to the beginning of the college journey, so to speak. I was actually all ready to become a Michigan State Spartan. Had a dorm room and a roommate assigned and financial aid all set up, the whole deal.
Mm.
And my stepdad said, "Hey, you really have to go check out the University of Montana," and took me up there. And I fell in love with Missoula, Montana, and with the campus there, and switched. And so I was in college there, and kind of went along for a couple of years, taking all the required courses, those kinds of things, and actually reached a point where the college was like, "All right, well, you have to pick a major," because I had been undecided up until that point. And I fell back on what I loved and chose art. And I'm really glad I did that because I had a fantastic experience and was really able to branch out into a lot of different areas. What was unfortunate is, when you go to a college like that and go through the art program, there isn't a lot of teaching you how to make money with art, how to go out and start a business with art, these kinds of things.
Mm.
And so when I got done and graduated, uh, I had to fall back on other things in order to be able to make a living. And that's when I started to, you mentioned a couple odd jobs, things like that. I actually had worked construction previously in high school and during the summers in college. And so I started framing houses. Realized quickly that I needed health insurance, things like that, and wanted to move into a role where that would be possible. And that's when I got hired and started at Vans, the company you mentioned, which was a consumer electronics and major appliance retailer based in the state of Montana.
Mm.
And that's really where things started to take off for me in a lot of different ways, right? So that gets me to the point where, I started to work in the customer service department. I then heard we were opening a store and I wanted to get into sales because that's what I had originally applied to do. And so I moved from Missoula to Billings and started becoming a salesperson in our new store there. Became the best salesperson in the organization for a little while in time. Not for very long because we had one guy that was amazing. But enough that I got some recognition and was asked to come back and be the assistant manager in our Missoula headquarters store, then moved into management in the Hamilton, Montana store. And that's really where kind of the e-commerce journey took off for me. So lots of fun there. Yeah.
Now, so you got to kind of move from customer service, went into sales, and I know you mentioned a little bit more about they were kind of wanting to, you were in sales for a period of time. Sounds like you did a great job, even if there was one other guy that you were competing back and forth with. That's still awesome. Now as you're in sales, you mentioned, I think when we talked a little bit before, e-commerce was coming about and kind of had an interest, but kind of how did that maybe opportunity or how did that arise as to saying, hey, this would be a good path that I'd like to take and going down that road?
Yeah. So I was in Hamilton, Montana. I was the manager of the location there. And for those of you that don't know Hamilton, Montana, average age there is 50. I was in my mid 20s at that point in time. It's a community of about 40,000 people, and it's 45 minutes south of Missoula, Montana, where I went to college and where all my friends and community were. And so I found myself frequently bored in the evenings, quite honestly. And so I knew that a couple folks in our organization were starting to build a website. And I said to them, I was like, how can I get in on this? What do you need help with? And what they said at that point in time is we really need the databases filled with content that are going to power the website pages. So literally started writing content like, okay, here's the model number, here's a brief description of it, here's all the specifications for 50 TVs and 25 receivers and 100 pairs of speakers, and like help them do all of that. And that's when I reached also kind of the breaking point that you mentioned, right? Like I'm living in Hamilton. I'm driving, north every evening after work if I'm not, filling out databases or whatever. And my social life was all somewhere else. And I just it just didn't fit for me anymore. And that's the moment in time where, I don't know how many people actually know this, but that's like I lined up another job. I was ready to go and become a target manager, quite honestly, and had interviewed with them and was like, they were going to send me off to where I live now, Denver, Colorado, to go to a management school that they have here. And I said, before you make a major significant change like that, don't just dismiss the organization you currently work for. Go and have a conversation with them. And so that's when that moment came, and I did. And I said, listen, I would love to come and work back in the headquarters, doing just about anything for you guys, as long as it's, a similar, earning potential for me. And if not, I totally get it. Like, I don't expect you to just open your arms and have a job for me. I've got something else, but I can't keep doing what I'm doing. And I got lucky. And they said, why don't you come and join the e-commerce operation?
So then I say, okay, hey, sounds great. Love to join the e-commerce operation. Sounds like it would be a good opportunity. Also, hey, rather than having to leave and go do somewhere else, you can or take advantage of the opportunity that the business you already had is presenting. And so now sounds like you didn't have a lot of background or experience in doing e-commerce or building websites yet. So kind of how did you go about tackling that, figuring out, building that side of the business out, and kind of going about that route?
Yeah. So it was 1998. I don't know a lot of people at that moment in time that had tons of experience with e-commerce, right? Everybody was a startup. And we were literally 5 or 6 individuals that were running this entire operation. And I mean, everything. We're on the phones, we're down in the warehouse checking in returns or putting, shipments that are on their way out into boxes. We're literally handwriting UPS labels because we didn't have a printer at that point in time. You're running back upstairs, you've got new products, you're writing copy for those. Somebody comes along and says, hey, here's biz rate, and you can go out and we can list all of our products on there. We just have to send them a data feed, and we got to figure out what we're going to put in there, and how does that work. And so we're all kind of churning through all of these things, and everybody on the team's finding, hey, I'm a little bit better at operations, I'm a little bit better at the marketing stuff, and we're learning as we go, and just trial by fire in a lot of ways. And was really fortunate, and that was almost like another whole intensive degree program in like go learn e-commerce, right? It's the masters in e-commerce by trial by fire. And so did that for quite a while as just kind of a member of the team. And then the individual that was managing that group wound up leaving, and I took over managing the e-commerce operation. And we grew and moved into a whole separate location from the retail store where we had just kind of had offices in the back room. We had our own warehouse, we had our own group of people. And it was literally to the point where I felt like, oh my gosh, this thing's so huge. It's not like we can have one e-commerce manager. We need some other people. We need like a general manager. We need a director of marketing. We need a director of operations. We need all these other things. And so that's
Mhm.
when I took over actually all of the digital marketing part of that e-commerce business. And some other folks did all the operations and those kinds of things. And so that was another great inflection point in realizing in growth, like when it's a good time to stick your hand up and say, I can't do this by myself. I need some help.
No, and I think that, it gets to the point, and I think for a lot of times, a lot of times you probably wait way too long of, hey, you keep saying I can get this to myself and I can get this taken care of. And, it's a balance because you're saying, hey, if I bring someone or other people on, I have to train them, I have to do all these other things. And so you tend to, maybe wait a bit too longer than you should, but with good, good purpose or good reason behind it. So now you
Totally.
managed and grew that bit or side of the e-commerce business for how long was that, or over what period of time?
Gosh, starting in 98, 99, and then all the way up until 2011. And by the time I exited that business, I was actually overseeing all the marketing for not only the e-commerce operations, but for all of the retail operations as well. And we
Hmm.
had a direct consumer catalog that we sent out quarterly that we were running as well from my group. So quite a bit. And in 2011, I made the decision to move away from that organization and came down to Denver, Colorado, and started working there for Cricket Wireless. And that was a fun experience as well. Helped them introduce the iPhone into prepaid wireless. Helped build a internal website for the franchisee
Before you
partners.
get too
Yeah,
far
yeah,
or
yeah.
deep into it, just have one question for you. So, I mean, you say, because I know when you talked and you mentioned and we talked before, you kind of got to the point 2011. Hey, I'm looking for a new challenge, different direction, want to do something different. Was there kind of an inflection point of saying, hey, this happened and it gave me the realization that I was bored or wanted something new or different? Or is it just kind of an aggregation of things, or kind of what caused you to say, hey, I need a new challenge, I'm going to go or move somewhere else, go do something else? What was kind of that genesis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. I was trying to be kind of the nice guy about it, but so Vans as an organization found themselves in kind of some financial difficulties at that point in time, and they actually wound up after I left a year or even maybe two. By the time it finally occurred, they went bankrupt, and the CEO found himself actually going to jail for a while,
Mm.
unfortunately. And the activities that were leading to all of that happening were actually prevalent at the point in time that I left, and even more so. We had had some consultants come in and say, here's all the things you need to do to right the ship and go after them, and here's a plan. And a bunch of us were ready to go execute that, and unfortunately not everybody was on board with executing that. And I could see that lack of cohesion around the direction of the organization, as well as some of the financial decisions were being made, were going to lead
Mm.
down the path that they did. And I didn't want to find myself in a scenario where I was working for somebody that was going bankrupt and I was going to lose my job. So I took the power into my own hands and said, I'm just going to find myself another job. And that was the impetus for it. And then chose the Denver market because my wife has all of her family. She's from here, and it made a lot of sense. A great booming economy at that point in time, and has continued to be. Yeah.
Awesome. Sounds like it was a good foresight, and I think taking the power kind of into your own hands as opposed to just slowly waiting for it to happen, and kind of death by a thousand cuts, or maybe death by one big cut.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was a good path that you took. So you said, okay, this is where I'm headed. Gonna or leave before things go south, so to speak, or too far south, and so you go do that. You take on the new adventure, and kind of how did you figure out new location, new adventure? Kind of how did you figure out what you were going to do?
Yeah, I started putting my name out there to quite a few different recruiters, and mostly was looking in the Denver, Colorado area. Although I had some crazy opportunities right at the point in time, like immediately accepted a job in Denver, and then had like three other opportunities come knocking on the door right away. But fortunately, I picked the opportunity in Denver with Cricket Wireless because it was going to be a pretty dramatic change in a lot of ways. I was moving into their merchandising group, and I was going to focus on just in-store merchandising. And
Mm,
I had reached this point with um, where I had been previously with e-commerce and that particular organization of running all the different stuff, where it was like, I feel torn across 50 different things all the time. And
mm.
maybe it'll be nice to do, focus on one thing. And ultimately, I almost immediately got back into e-commerce consulting because one, I realized if I get out of this, it's going so fast, I'm going to be behind, and nobody's
Mm.
going to like give me the time of day for consulting or for job opportunities or anything. So I started consulting for some other organizations, and then I started reaching out internally in Cricket and saying, what else can I do? And that's ultimately how I got involved in helping to launch iPhone into prepaid wireless for them, and how I got involved in actually setting up a website to sell security devices and fixtures to franchisees, which was just an internal, infrastructure kind of piece of website utilized by Cricket employees and Cricket franchisee employees. But still, that was a fun project. Like, built the Magento website and started driving transactions from a B2B perspective internally. So that was super interesting. And then Cricket got bought by AT&T, and so I was at another inflection point. And AT&T was actually asking me to stay with the company, but they wanted me to move to Atlanta. And so I gave that the old college try. I went out there for a little while, and ultimately found it wasn't a place that I wanted to be, or that my family wanted to be. And so was in a scenario where, hey, guess what? Time to find another gig.
So now so you didn't find another gig, and I think when we chatted a bit before, you kind of went through a few. You worked kind of in similar industries for solar and electronic components, and that kind of moved throughout the industry. Now kind of give us that quick progression, because I think at some point you decided, hey, I'm gonna after so many years later, decided I'm going to go do my own consultancy and kind of go down that route. So kind of fills in that gap as to kind of what was that progression.
Yeah. So the solar company I was consulting for towards the end of my Cricket tenure, and that kind of overlapped. And then I moved into B2B e-commerce, and that's with an organization called Aero Electronics, and they're one of the top distributors of electronic components in the entire world. 30 plus $billion in revenue. I haven't kept track of exactly what they're at right now, but massive company.
Mm.
And they deal with organizations like contract manufacturers like Foxconn and folks that make the iPhone, or Jabil and Sanmina, and these huge kinds of industries and companies. And I got a job there in the digital group in the e-commerce department for them, where when I had been interviewing for it, it was kind of a product owner equivalent to what we all think of as an e-commerce product owner right now in the world. But it was going to be across three websites, and it was going to be this huge, massive job. And it felt a little broad in its scope, quite honestly. And lucky for me, my first day there was the second day for a new chief digital officer, this guy named Matt Anderson. And the guy that hired me into the organization said, glue yourself to that guy's hip and hang on for the ride. And fortunately, Matt could see that I had, e-commerce knowledge, that I had done it in the past, that I understood digital marketing, all these kinds of things. And so I started to be able to work alongside him. And then eventually, we shaped a new group within the digital team there at Arrow, where I was the director of digital services. And this was an internal agency, essentially doing all of the digital marketing and analytics for Arrow.com, for Verical.com, which was an online components marketplace, and for a couple of the other websites in the Arrow digital portfolio. And that then grew into me actually being the general manager of Verical.com. So I ran that entire operation and helped grow that through quite a few different methods. And ultimately, that industry ran into some challenges with, the tariffs that got imposed on electronic components in the fairly recent past, and some supply and demand changes where, planning of goals in a year where demand was high and supply was tight switched when demand got low and supply was rich. So that led to me making the decision that it was time to go find some other work. And I then ventured off into mobile marketing and mobile ad tech, and worked with a company called Ad Action and helped them through business development, and launched a new office in London and hired a general manager over there, helped deliver, some pretty lofty sales goals to them, and did a lot of fun things, but started to feel towards, the end of 2021 that things were, growing for me again into an area where I wanted to explore some new stuff. And that's when I ventured out and did some solo shop consulting in October 2021. Yeah.
So now you said, okay, gonna do my own solo thing and or make the leap, go out, or and kind of go in that direction. So you go out there in 2021, so a couple of years ago. I think that's always a time where sometimes it's awesome and great and you enjoy it and you find out you love it, and other times you find out you hate it, or you don't like it, or you're not good at it, and none are not bad or good or bad, any of the above. It's just kind of a time where you get to find those out, as well as you get to find out, hey, this is oftentimes much harder than I anticipated, or isn't as easy as I thought. So kind of give us an idea, when you went out on your own, did it rocket ship to the top and you loved it and enjoyed it and it went amazing and you had tons of clients, sunk and hated it and was overwhelmed and burned out, or somewhere in between? But kind of fill us in as to how that went.
Yeah, it's another kind of interesting story for me, at least. Hopefully, it is for other people. I was actually all lined up to take another job for somebody else, and I was going to go and run another website for a company in the ID protection world, and going to be able to work from home and all these kinds of things, and it was great. And I had gotten contacted by some friends of mine, actually the founder of Nimble Gravity, the organization that I work for and work with now, reached out and asked me if I had some time to do some freelance consulting, because I had done a little bit here and there for them. And I was like, nah, listen, I love you guys. I'm sorry. I'm about to start a new job. I don't think it's a good idea for me to take on a big project while I'm also drinking from the fire hose of information that a new job comes with. Like, let's pass on this time, but call me back, down the road. And he just happened to mention, he was like, well, you should call, a mutual friend of ours and just let him know that you're transitioning and those kinds of things, because we were chatting about you the other day. And I was like, all right, don't think anything's going to come of that, but whatever, I'll let him know. So I texted this guy because I know that he never picks up his phone. Like he doesn't do it. And, I'm just like, hey, changing jobs, going to switch to this. Hope you're doing well, kind of thing. And immediately after I sent it, and my phone started ringing, and it was him. And he was like, don't do it. And I was like, what do you mean don't do it? And he's like, if I could, if I could get you enough work, would you feel comfortable being, an independent consultant on your own and do,
Mm,
independent contracting work for me and for others that I could help you drum up some work with? And I was like, well, yeah, but like, you got to show me, like, we got to have something tangible here. I mean, this sounds super interesting and fun and new, but I wanted some kind of, assurances, as much as anybody can give you an assurance about any job, which is not that much. But like, I wanted to feel better about telling the guys that I had agreed to go work for that I wasn't going to work for them and be
mm,
certain I was going to have an income. Lo and behold, he's able to make that, happen and give me enough assurance that there's going to be work for me that 24 hours before I was going to take another job, I had to call the hiring manager and give him the most terrible news I think you can give to somebody who is expecting a new employee to start the next day of, sorry, I'm not coming in, and here's why. So I deeply apologize to that individual, and have done so many times, but it was a new path for me and wound up becoming amazingly fun. Yeah.
mm. So now, no, and I think, that is interesting because you have it all lined up, and I agree, it is absolutely an inflection point. You have to decide, do I go what appears to be a safe route? Although I always contend, just working for a big business, just like you see all the layoffs and you hear the announcements,
Totally.
there's not a lot more security. Now it feels more secure just because you're removed from the financial aspect and how it's all run, and sometimes you don't have to see that, so it feels like you're safe. But on the other hand, once you know once you do your own thing, at least you know what's going on. So you go
Yeah.
do you start the consultancy, say, okay, I'm going to go do my own thing, going to go down this different route. Now you did that around 2021. And then I think at some point along there, got acquired or merged or otherwise joined up with some other partners. And that's kind of where you're at today. So kind of fill us in. How's it
Yeah.
gone since you started, and what caused or what or brought you to where you're at today?
Yeah. 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 So, October of 21, I started the solo thing and did that until the end of the year, really. And what had been going on is I was doing work about e-commerce or performance marketing or growth marketing, whatever you want to term it as in the particular work stream, alongside the guys at Nimble Gravity when they're looking at data science or talent analysis or whatever it might have been that they were doing. And we were also frequently working for the same client, right? And so it kind of just made sense for us to join forces rather than for me to have my own thing and them have their own thing and always be working on the same stuff. Why not make both organizations a little bit more powerful? Me making myself much more powerful with their resources versus the other way around. Hiring one guy isn't necessarily a game changer, but fortunately, that all went super smoothly. And I started working directly with Nimble Gravity, got
Mm.
brought into the fold. The intention was I wasn't going to start until the middle of January of 22, but literally had a project come in on the 2nd, and it was kind of like, well, whatever. Like this is the consulting world. Something comes in, and it's like it's time to work. So jumped right in and started working with them January 2nd of 2022. And, now we're 14 months later ish, 13 months later ish. And it's been fantastic working across a huge diverse group of clients, everything from health companies to Earth Ranger is a company that makes software to protect wildlife and in preserves and things like that, and help those folks that manage it, helping launch clothing brands, you name it. So all kinds of fun stuff, and it's just been a great journey. Yeah.
And you were going to answer, I was going to say, sometimes you get into partnerships, mergers, and otherwise, sharing resources and say, hey, this is awesome, this is great, and makes perfect sense. And other times you say, I wish I'd regretted it, but, wish I'd stayed or solo or that, or, give me my freedom. So sounds like in this case, it worked out well, and it was a good partnership or a good decision that it worked out well so far. Is that a fair summary?
Totally. Yeah. Like, I mean, they hired a bunch of people that if I was going to build my own shop and keep working on my own, like they were the same people I would have gone after. They had back office folks. Like I didn't have to deal with like, how do I figure out insurance or HR kinds of things anymore. Right. So it was an ability to join a group that I was already, filled with friends and former coworkers from my days at Arrow and other places, where it was just like it was getting back to this great group of people and accelerating a bunch of resources and doing the same thing. So it's been wonderful. Yeah.
That's awesome. Always glad it works out well, and it's a good decision. So that's great that it's worked out well so far, and are a lot of work yet to come. So
Totally.
well, now as we kind of are caught up to the present day of the journey, it's always a great time to transition to the two questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now.
For
So the
sure.
first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
Gosh. Um, I don't know if it could have gone down any other way. Um, but I think one of the decisions that I kind of got forced into making
Mm,
was around an employee situation where an individual disagreed with the productivity and performance expectations that we had on everybody in the same role that this individual held, and didn't feel that producing things at a high speed with a minimal amount of mistakes was as important and as good as producing things very slowly with zero mistakes.
mm,
And so in e-commerce, oftentimes, especially in the early days, being first to get a listing in SEO was critically important, right? And so you're writing product copy and getting out content and creating new pages. It's important to have speed at that. And it's acceptable then to say, listen, if there's a spelling error or some grammatical errors or whatever, and they're minimal, it's not like the entire thing is gibberish, let it go and let's get it out there and we can come back and iterate on this process.
mm,
And that individual didn't agree with that. And the performance management process that we had to go through was burdensome and
mm,
long, right? And so I think the worst decision was continuing to allow that to be prolonged. And it got to the point where there was mediation involved, and eventually the person left the organization. And after they left, they later admitted to being substantially happier having left the organization. And if we could have just compressed that timeline and had an honest, one-on-one conversation without all that kind of stuff, like, hey, this isn't a good fit, here's why, let's part ways nicely, like
mm.
that to me felt like a bad decision, both from a human standpoint, not only for him and me getting drugged through that process, but just from a business standpoint and wasting those resources and having a misaligned team and all those kinds of things.
No, and I think, and that is always hard to, the more experience you get, hopefully you get a little bit better at hiring, but every time you go through it, to set expectations for them to understand, for you to understand, and then once they're hired, to make sure that everybody's aligned, that it's the right fit, and that is, it's everybody. I think everybody always thinks that, hey, I know what I'm doing and I would do a better job, and all those other people out there, they just don't get how to do it. You get into it, it's a much more difficult route, and it takes a lot more
Yeah,
experience to avoid those mistakes. So definitely an easy mistake to make, but a good one to learn from.
totally.
Now, second question I always ask is, now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, I've been talking about this with quite a few people lately because it's a similar thread to some of the conversations. Learn when to fire yourself.
Hmm.
It would be the advice I would give you. And you're not going to be able to fire yourself for a while when you're a solopreneur and you're just starting, and like, maybe you have one or two employees, right? But you are going to have to figure out along the path when it's time to let go of certain things. And you should look at it as like, I'm firing myself from being the director of marketing. I'm the CEO. I can't be responsible for putting out all of the tweets and running the paid search program and like, all these kinds of things that might come up. And you have to maximize and optimize that process of kind of firing yourself and growing and letting go of things, whether it's something you're doing as an individual contributor and you just have to fire yourself from doing too much on your to-do list and getting too scattered, or you're growing through an organization that's not yours and you're moving from senior management to director to VP. Like, your job changes, what you have to do changes. And the same thing is true for somebody who's a founder. As you go through that process, you have to realize when it's time to let go of things, and you don't want to do it too soon, because then it's a profitability challenge, right? And that creates a scenario that might be not good for you and somebody that you bring in to do things. But you also don't want to do it too late either, right? Like, you don't want to wait to the point where people are snapping because they have too much on their plates, and you need to have fired yourself from a process or given that to somebody else. So
No, I think that's definitely a great piece of advice, great takeaway, and I think it's a good, insightful thoughts. So, well, now as we wrap towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
yeah, I think the two best ways are the website, nimblegravity.com, spelled just like it, the two words, obviously. No funky leaving out vowels or anything. And then LinkedIn would be the other fast way. Look me up on LinkedIn, Matt Ranta. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, make a connection, and if nothing else, a new best friend. So with that, thank you again, Matt, for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, the listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review. It helps us to share these journeys with even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And on that note, if you ever need help along your journey with patents, trademarks, or anything else with startups or small businesses, just go to strategymeeting.com. Grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Matt, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, Devin. Really appreciate it. Good luck.